What if you could turn more of your subscribers into paying customers? Hey, I'm going to raise my hand too, because who wouldn't? Well, this is exactly what we are going to talk about in today's episode. Welcome to Build Your Thing, the podcast where we help content creators find their unique creative voice, build their tribe of loyal fans, and monetize their work. My guest today is Andrew Gould. Andrew has been a copywriter since 2009, and in this episode, he is going to share with us the 5 golden rules to write effective copy so that you can transform more people in your audience into paying customers. Let's get started. Awesome, Andrew. Welcome to the show.
Oh, welcome, Matt. Thanks for having me here.
It's an honor to have you here, Andrew. To give the listeners a little bit of context, yes, I deeply hate social media, and this is something that I'm constantly, telling my audience. However, I've been lurking on Twitter for the past 2 months simply because of my new AI writing tool, which is called Growth Writer. And this is basically how I discovered your account, and I'm glad I did. So, Andrew, for those who don't know you, can you tell us a little bit more about who you are and what you've been doing since 2009?
My name's Andrew Gould. As you might be able to tell from my accent, I'm in the UK, and I've been a freelance direct response copywriter since 2009. And before then, I spent about 5 years in sales. So I've got a fair bit of experience at all this. And I generally work with people selling info products, and I write sales pages for them, VSLs, which stands for video sales letter, and I write emails for them.
Awesome. This is very interesting. So what got you started in the fact of switching from, in real life sales to basically copywriting and selling info products?
Right. Oh, this is going to be quite a long answer, I'm afraid, Matt. So I'll apologize.
We are on a podcast. We're on long form. It's okay. Like nobody's going to. People should expect that we're going to go deep in some topics here. So that's fine for me.
Okay. Well, it starts almost from when I was born, because when I was born, I was a very sickly and ill child. I was in and out of hospital all the time. I had asthma, I had eczema. I was a very weak child. And growing up, that kind of stuck with me. I've got the glasses because my eyesight wasn't good. The doctor said I shouldn't do any sport, I shouldn't do any activities or anything. I was, sitting inside on the computer all the time. That was pretty much my life. And then fast forward kind of a few years later, and I'm being bullied at school, because I'm the smallest and weakest one there. So I'm the natural target. But, there's not much I can do about that. You complain to the teachers and they don't care. So I just lived with it. And then when I was 16, I watched a Jackie Chan movie. The movie was called Drunken Master. And I thought it was the greatest thing I'd ever seen. And I thought Jackie Chan was the greatest man I'd ever seen. And I wanted to be able to do that. I thought, I want to be able to move like Jackie. I want to do Kung Fu. But, I couldn't. I was a sickly weakling. But I decided, no, I'm going to do this. And so I just started running everywhere. Instead of walking from place to place, I ran from place to place. And at the start, I could barely make it from one lamppost to another before I was out of breath and feeling like I was going to die and needing my inhaler. But it didn't take long until I could run anywhere for any length of time. I could run 20 minutes downtown, come back, and I was in shape. And then from there, I joined a local martial arts class. And it turned out I was rather good at it. And in 6 months' time, I went from being this weak little nerd to teaching part of the class and leading the warm-up. And not that we're going to cover it in this podcast, I went on to compete professionally. And I did pretty well. And how that to relate that back to copywriting, because I was into martial arts, I was buying martial arts magazines. And these magazines are all terrible. All of them are awful. But what's great about them was the adverts. And I was absolutely fascinated by these adverts, kill a man in 3 seconds, learn the secret of US Navy SEALs, all that type of thing. I thought they were the most amazing things I'd ever read. And yeah, I'd often buy the magazines just for the adverts. But then, I never thought about it as a career at that point at all. And I went on to university where I studied accounting. And at some point at university, because at that point I had access to the internet, and this would be in the late 90s, like 1997. So the internet was still a new thing. And while looking on martial arts websites, someone described those adverts as Dan Kennedy style adverts. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. I've got a name. Let me Google the net. Well, I didn't Google it because Google wasn't a thing back then. Let me search for Dan Kennedy. And so I found this Dan Kennedy, who was a copywriter who did this thing called direct response copywriting. And on his website, you could give him your email address and he'd send you a 12-week course on copywriting. And that was the first time I'd done anything like that. I thought, hey, I'll give it a go. So, I gave him my email address. And over the next 12 weeks, I got information on what copywriting was. And again, I found it fascinating. I found it just as fascinating as reading the adverts. But I was at university to study accounting, so I didn't really think about it after that. I went on my way. I got my degree. I left university. And then I didn't really like accounting. So I did a lot of kind of entry-level jobs there. I worked in construction a bit. I did some ceiling fitting. I delivered the mail. And I worked in a supermarket, worked on the till, stacked shelves. And then eventually I found my way into sales. And it turned out I was pretty good at sales. And I quite liked it. I wasn't sure I would, but it worked for me. So for the next few years, I was quite content working in sales. And then the 2008 financial crash hits, and the economy's in trouble, and the business I was working for was selling cameras. And at that point, more and more people were starting to use their phones to take pictures. And combined with the recession, the business, they shut down. And so I was out of a job. And I thought, well, I've got all this sales experience. I know what copywriting is. So why not try to make a go of it as a freelance copywriter? And I did, and I've not looked back.
Awesome. I love this story. So can you tell us a little bit more how you actually started sharpening your skills as a copywriter? So obviously you had this experience in sales. You've been through kind of a Dan Kennedy email marketing email sequence. So yeah.
Okay, I'll continue then. The very first thing I did was, obviously I went home, I went on Google, started searching out things like best copywriting books, best copywriting courses. And then I settled on buying 3 books to start with. I bought Dan Kennedy's book, The Ultimate Sales Letter. I bought the Richard Cialdini book, Influence, which isn't about copywriting, but it's about persuasion in general. It's a very useful book for anybody in the field. And then I also bought a book by Richard Bayens, I think that's his name, called Words That Sell. It's a collection of effective words that you can use in your writing that make your writing better. I'm not sure I've ever even referred to it, but it was recommended at the time. And so I read those books, and that gave me more of an understanding of copywriting. And then from there, I started posting on an online marketing forum known as the Warrior Forum. It's still around, but back then it was probably the place to be if you were into internet marketing. And so I started posting on there, and I built myself up quite a reputation. Even though I was a beginner, I think I've always been fairly good at breaking concepts down and helping simplify things for people. And so I built up a reputation there, and I got my first clients on there. And then while I'm doing that, at the same time, I've been buying other books. And in the end, I ended up investing in courses, and I invested in coaching. I coached under a gentleman called Ray Edwards, who's a very well-known copywriter. And they all helped me get better and better. And I was getting clients at the same time. And yeah, everything just kept getting better and better for me.
Wow, I love that. So there are really 2 things that actually resonated with me. So the first thing is that you actually started building your reputation on a platform. Back then, it was the Warrior Forum. Today, people might start creating content on, let's say, Medium, X, LinkedIn, various different platforms. So you were actually just starting breaking down complicated concepts and simply was only creating content, right? So just explaining things that you were learning. So this is an interesting point. And the second interesting point right here is that you didn't only, when I say only, quote unquote, only read books, but you also had kind of a mentor and someone who actually guided you and show you and was here to actually show you the mistakes that you were making, and also emphasizing the things that you did right so that you can do actually more of that. So correct me if I'm wrong, but I think like those two elements probably played a big role in your career as a copywriter.
Yes, definitely. Creating content on a platform was, I mean, I could probably say it was life-changing, really, because I went from being just another person to, so I became, I don't want to say famous, but, you become like a micro-celebrity. People start to know you, and you build your reputation. And in fact, probably one of the worst things I did in my career was I stopped creating content for several years once my career took off. And I've got quite a gap in that. So I wish I'd kept doing it. Yeah. And regarding coaching, I think getting a coach or a mentor is probably one of the only shortcuts there is if you want to make money, because they can help point you in the right direction and make sure you're doing the right thing. Whereas on your own, it's easy to go off in all sorts of different ways and not really know if what you're doing is the right thing or not.
Yeah, I totally agree on that. So tell us a little bit more about the process, because of actually writing sales letters, perhaps also becoming better at simply expressing your thoughts when it comes to writing. So when you actually, okay, so let's assume I want to launch a course. Like, what are the things that you as a seasoned copywriter want to know so that you can start writing a sales page for that specific course?
Okay. Well, the first thing I'd want to know is, can you afford to pay me? Now, I know that's going to sound a bit cavalier, but that's a very serious point. If you're professional, you always want to make sure you're going to be paid. So one of the first things I would always do is bring up the cost. Even if you're just starting out, make sure the person who you're going to do the work for knows that you expect to be paid and sort of what sort of money you expect to be paid. And now, to be a little more serious, to focus on what you actually need for the copywriting, there's really 3 areas you want to focus on. The first is you want to understand the audience, is who you're selling to. You want to know, what do they want? What do they want to move towards? Then you want to know, what don't they want? What do they want to move away from? And then you also want to know, what objections do they have to what you're selling? Because people have always got objections to why they shouldn't buy what you're selling. And you can ignore them, but they won't ignore them. And then you also want to know, what language do they use when they're talking about that topic? For example, if you'd say, hey, Andrew, I can get you more customers. That immediately shows me you don't know what you're talking about, because I don't want customers. As a service professional, I want clients. So you've got to make sure your language is spot on. Okay? And then the second thing you want to look at is the competition, because you're almost certainly going to be going up against other people selling something similar. So you want to look at what they're selling. You want to go through their sales pages and break them down a bit. What's the headline in there? What elements of proof are they offering? How much does their offer cost? What's the guarantee? All the various bits like this, because you want to see what works, and you also want to see what they're not saying. What gaps are there that you can fit into? And then the third element you need to look into is the product itself. You need to very literally take it to pieces. You want to list out all of the features it has, and then convert them into benefits, into what it does for the buyer. And you also want to ask the person who's selling it what their story is. How did they come to sell that course? And there's often a lot of valuable information in there. For example, let's say you're selling a waterproof wallet. Then, you might, if you write it normally, you might think, oh, the world's first waterproof wallet, something like that. That's good. But then if you talk to the gentleman who made it, maybe he's going to tell you he came up with the idea after he was stranded in the rainforest for 17 days. And wow, suddenly you've got an amazing story you can use to sell. So yes, those are the three things, the three big things you want to know before you start writing: who you're writing to, what the competition is, and what it is you're writing about.
Wow, that's very interesting. So I want to go back a little bit to the competition, because at least when I got started, I was a little bit afraid of looking what others were doing. At that point, I was kind of naive, and I thought that I need to come up with kind of a unique thing that nobody ever sold before. And then, after painful years of struggle and failure, I finally understood that this was the wrong way to go. So how do you judge basically reverse engineering competitors? Like, how do you know that basically, yes, this is a competitor worth reverse engineering?
I'll almost always ask my client, because he should have a pretty good idea of who his true competitors are. And then as well as that, the other good way to see is who's spending money on ads. Because, like I said, there's a lot of competition out there, but most of them probably aren't your real competition. So you want to see who's been spending money on adverts for a long time. If someone's been spending money on an advert for 6 months or something, then it's a good sign that's working, as very few businesses are going to run at a loss. So I would always see who's spending money on advertising, and that tells you who your serious competition is.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. So a little hack right now is, perhaps you might not know like for how long an ad has been running, but one of the things that I like to do when I see some YouTube ads is basically just look at the number of views, right? And if you have hundreds of thousands of views, then you probably can assume that this ad is quite successful, and that start reverse engineering.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, as well, you've got the Facebook ads library, or Meta ads library, whatever you call it now. That gives you a lot of information on what ran and for how long it ran for. And you can also use tools such as, is it AdSpy, the keyword tools, where they can give you a lot of information about what other people are doing.
Awesome. So now when it comes to actually writing the sales page, or basically writing any kind of content, right? So might it be a social media post? Might it be an email? Might it be a sales page? As a creator, we need to be persuasive, right? People are busy. People don't have time. And what is actually your process, or what has been your process to sharpen your writing skills?
Sharpening my writing skills, that's a great question. Now, I do differentiate quite a bit between writing for a sales page and writing for social media, because I've got a much deeper, longer process for writing typically copy I'm doing professionally than for doing social media. But a lot of the principles do apply between both of them. So if I'm going to write anything, let's say it is for social media, I'm creating content, then and you want to understand that you're always selling something, even if it's not selling your course or your service. Then what you're typically doing is you're selling your ideas. You want people to believe your philosophy. So you always want to keep in mind you're always selling something. You're not just giving information for information's sake. And then the next point would be you always want to write to one person. So you're never writing at a group in general. It's always one person. So I will always use the word you a lot. I'm writing from me directly to them. And I want the person reading it to believe that I'm talking to them and only them. And another key point is a copywriting rule known as the rule of one. And the rule of one is very simple. It says you just want to focus on one idea in whatever you're writing. So even if it's a ridiculous 36-page sales letter or a 2-sentence tweet, or X post, whatever you call it now, you only want to focus on one idea. A lot of people, they get confused and they put in multiple ideas, and it's very easy to confuse your audience and lose focus. So those are kind of almost the key principles behind it. And then other options you can do are just call out your audience. So again, if I'm writing a sales page or if I'm writing a tweet to a specific audience, I will literally just call them out. For example, on Saturday, I wrote something for people who are email marketers. I think my first line was, have you got an email list? It's not particularly clever, it's not sophisticated, but it lets the people reading it know this is for them.
Mm-hmm.
And, another option you've got is you can target a pain point. If someone's got a specific pain, you can call that out at the top of whatever content you're writing, and that'll grab their attention too. For example, for email marketing, it might be, are you getting too many unsubscribes or something like that? So does that all make sense, Matt?
Totally. So I really like the fact that you have been, focusing on the principles, and we are going to talk about that more in just a few. But for now, I think, or at least this is something that I've been experiencing, and I think that a lot of people also have this issue when they just start writing content, is the fact that our writing can be a little bit fluffy and not really straight to the point. Do you have any specific tips that the listeners can apply to make their writing, more concise? And yep.
Yes. What I tend to do is I tend to divide the writing up into two kind of areas. You've got the idea you're writing about, and then you've got the actual words that you're using to write about it. And I always like to get crystal clear on the idea I'm trying to put across first and foremost. So before I even worry about how I phrase it, I just want to get the idea down, and I will write that idea out. And, I might even spend some time looking at that idea. Is that idea clear enough? Do I fully understand it? Is it simple enough? And then when I'm happy with the idea, and then I will try to write it out. And I find that helps keep everything focused and concise, because you know exactly what you want to say. And then when you have written it, you can again step back, look at it, see, is there anything I can possibly remove? Because I think most of us write a bit fluffy to start with, and that's okay. It doesn't matter. The first thing you write, it doesn't really matter. It's not where you start, it's where you end up. So I would write out, however, some of my tweets and posts, they're probably half the size they were when I post them than when I first wrote them.
Oh, that makes perfect sense. So I totally agree with you on that. When it comes to simply creating content, you can focus on two things at the same time, right? So number one, focus on the idea, right? So the more you write about something, the clearer you get about the idea. And number two, and simply think about the words, right? How you actually express this idea. So those are basically two different things. And I think you're spot on when you're saying that if you try to do two things at the same time, you're just, draining and just wasting too much mental bandwidth on doing two things at the same time. I always like to come up with this analogy where I say, okay, it's like trying to look at the right and at the left side at the same time. It just, it just doesn't work. So this is a great tip. And this basically brings me to a question that I wanted to ask you. And because we basically have something in common right here, which is the fact that we both love long form content. So since you mentioned that when you are in the midst of writing a post, you focus more on the idea and then, chop away a lot of words that actually make or might be a little bit fluffy in your first draft. So how did you actually transition from writing long form to writing short form content?
I think I've always been pretty good at writing short and writing concise. So I think what helped me was it was purely focusing on that idea and trying to cram in as much as I can possibly say in as little space as possible. And I think what helped me with that was writing bullet points in sales copy. Now, bullet points are, well, there is the sound. They're the little bullet points. They tend to be about benefits. For example, a classic bullet point is what never tweet on an airplane. You see? That builds curiosity. It's a great little bullet point, and that couldn't be any shorter. It uses about the fewest words possible to make its point. And so, for me, I think an important skill in copywriting is learning bullet point writing. If you can write bullets like that, I think you can write almost anything, because it teaches you to keep your writing nice and tight and punchy and focused on that idea. So, yes, I think bullet writing is a great skill and an often overlooked skill for anyone writing.
I love that. And I remember Ben Settle telling in one of his courses, which is the 10-minute workday, that, you know, one of the key elements, or like the most important element in a sales page, might be the bullet points. And I think he quoted, I don't know who it was, a great copywriter, either it was Gary Halbert or someone else, basically saying that it's all about the bullets, right? So this is quite interesting, because I really don't like much writing bullets, right? And basically, I'm going to take your tip and start writing more bullet points, right? Just to really sharpen my skills when it comes to social media writing. So this is a great tip. Thank you very much for that.
You're welcome. And I would recommend, you just mentioned Ben Settle, is going to have a look at Ben Settle's sales pages, because he is an expert at bullet writing. And if you spend some time reading his bullet points, you're going to get quite the education on it, as they're all top notch.
Yep. And for the listeners, I've interviewed Ben in a previous episode, so you can always go back and check out that episode. This was an epic one. So yeah, so let me just switch gears a bit. And I already mentioned that previously, but one of the things that I really enjoyed in your content, Andrew, is the fact that you are focusing more on the principles rather than the tactics. And given the fact that I was kind of a shiny object junkie, right? So I was chasing shiny objects. I didn't really understand the fact, the importance of principles, right? So especially when it comes to copywriting, or let's say online marketing in general today, many people, just focus on the quick wins, on the small hacks, or the little things that they can do to beat their algorithm, or, just try to trick the game. How did you, or what do you think are one of the most important principles content creators should learn and study over and over again to simply become better at what they do?
Okay. Yes, I think when we all start out, we kind of all get attracted to the shiny, bright. We all get attracted to the bright, shiny objects because they're so tempting, aren't they? But yes, you do want to focus on the principles and the concepts. And the five that I preach are clarity, specificity, benefits, proof, and research. Those are the five things that I recommend people to focus on, because I've seen a lot of copy, a lot of writing over the years, and it's almost always one of those elements, or more than one, that's lacking. So proof, clarity, benefits, research, and specificity are the points I recommend people to focus on. Do you want me to expand on those a bit?
Yes.
Okay. Well, research, I think we talked about research earlier, about researching who you're writing to, the competition, and what you're writing about. So, then clarity. Clarity is rule number one in persuasion. And it means exactly what it says. Make your writing clear. Because if people can't understand what you're saying, then nothing else really matters. Your writing needs to be as easy to understand as possible, because I read far too much writing where you read the first sentence and you have to stop and pause and think, hang on, what does that mean? And then you go back and read it again and you're still not sure. And at that point, you've lost your reader. So clarity is key. And then next is specificity. You don't want to write in general terms. Everything wants to be as specific as possible. Give as much detail as possible, because when you're getting detail, it helps bring things to life in the mind of your readers. It helps make things more real. It makes them more believable. So, instead of saying, I was walking down the road at night and the car stopped, you might say, it was a cold, foggy night. I was walking down Park Road in the centre of town when a black Mercedes pulled up next to me. Now, do you see the difference in that? Essentially, they're saying the same thing. But when I add the specificity in, it becomes much more interesting and starts to pull you in to what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Okay, so that's where are we? Specificity. And then benefits. Now, we kind of sort of cover benefits with bullet point writing. There's a lot of crossover. Benefits are what's in it for the person who's reading. So if I'm selling something, and it's, what's the advantage of it? It's if I'm selling a phone and I say it's got a super bright screen, and the benefit of that is you can see it even in the brightest sunlight, for example. And you always want to understand the benefits, and that does apply to content. You want to tell people what's the benefit of them reading your content? What are they going to get out of it? So you don't just want to give people your content, you want to sell them on your content. Obviously, the classic kind of content structure is from Aristotle. Tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. But I think we can update that to tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them why it's important. Because people have got so many options nowadays, they can easily go somewhere else. So you always want to sell what you're doing. Tell them why it's important, why they should listen to you. Okay? And then the last element is proof. And although I did say that clarity was rule number one, proof might be the most important. Because let's face it, online, you can say absolutely anything. You can rent a Lamborghini for a day, borrow a Rolex, buy a couple of fancy cigars, and you can pass yourself off as a millionaire very easily. And so you always want to be giving people as much proof, as many reasons to believe you as you possibly can. And yeah, that is absolutely vital. The more they can believe you, and the better you're going to do. Does that all make sense, Matt?
Totally. I really love that. And it really reminds me of the episode that I did with Terry Dean, who talked about the Golden Glove, right? And a lot of things that you've been mentioning right here are basically also part of the Golden Glove. So I really like how all those different, the different things that the guest mentions on the show right here start to make sense, right? When you start simply connecting the dots, right? So this is pretty interesting. And I really want to talk a little bit more about proof. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, so I've been on Twitter right now for two or 3 months quite intensively, simply because I'm just working on my AI tool. And one of the things that I've been a little bit annoyed by is, all those screenshots that you see all the day, right? So I made this amount of money, I've made that amount of money. So, how do you think about those kind of quote unquote proofs? And I think that you've been on the internet for what? For 20 plus years. So you know that how easy it is to simply fake screenshots and to do all that kind of unethical thing. How do you think about, those kind of proofs that you see everywhere right now on social media?
Yeah, I think I tend not to believe the screenshots of Stripe accounts and that type of thing, because they are so easy to fake. I mean, the exception is if I already know the person's, if I already trust the person. For example, let's take a big creator like Kieran Drew. Now, Kieran has been transparent with everything he's done since he started posting online. So if he posts a Stripe screenshot and say, hey, I made $100,000, I believe him 100% because everything he's done up to that point has been spot on. He's not lied. He's not tried to deceive. So I would believe that. But let's say if some random guy who I don't know says, hey, I launched my course and I made $100,000. Here's a screenshot. Yeah, I'm probably not going to believe them.
Okay, so what do you think should be or is one of the paths creators can take in order to build up their credibility, especially when they were starting out? So I'm not talking about specifically creators who are in the make money online space, but creators who are just getting started, right? So how do you start when you have no proof, or even let's say when you have some proof, but you can't really show it for one reason or another, right? Might it be because of a contract that you signed, or perhaps other things?
Yeah, the first element I would add with people proving it is be honest. Because you look online, you look at a lot of creators and you look in their bios, like, I can 10 times your business with the power of my words. I work with 7 and 8 figure businesses. And it's all nonsense. They're new. They're just starting out. They'd be much better if they admitted that and were upfront with it. For example, from the very first client I ever got, I told him he would be my very first client. I didn't try to deceive him. I let him know that. So I think the first point is just be honest in everything you post. And that goes a long way. People can sense it. It feels much more authentic than trying to make some huge claims that you clearly can't live up to. And then the next point is confidence. You want to be confident in what you say. For example, again, you can look at, there's a lot of, typically teenage boys, or teenage men, whatever you want to call them, are posting content, and they're doing well with it purely because of their confidence. They've got so much self-belief, and it comes through in their and it comes through in what they write, and it's incredibly persuasive. So you want to be confident in what you write. And then the next step is simplicity. You want to keep everything you write as simple as possible, because generally the simpler you can make something, the more it shows you, the more it shows your audience that you understand it. Because, it's easy to kick out a bunch of word salad that doesn't really mean anything. But if you can simplify something and make it so clear anybody can understand it, that kind of proves that you know what you're talking about. And then you also want to be specific in your content. We just talked about the importance of specificity, and that's why it helps that. And then another element you can use is what's known as reason why copy. And reason why might be the foundation of direct response copy. And reason why is exactly what it sounds like. You give a reason why for everything you say. So, you might say, eat ice cream after every meal to lose weight. Probably not many people are going to believe you. If you say, eat ice cream, maybe eat 1 spoonful of ice cream after every meal you eat, because it activates your widget inside your stomach that burns fat for the next 7 hours. And now you've offered a reason for it, and it sounds much more believable. Even though that example was obviously just nonsense. Okay. And then the next thing you can do to help with proof, and this can be difficult to apply for a lot of things, but it's demonstration. Can you demonstrate what you're doing? For example, let's say again, if you're in weight loss, you want to be posting pictures of yourself and you want to look, as shredded as possible. And you want to post pictures of maybe other people you've worked with who've lost weight, demonstrate that you can do what you're talking about. And similarly, if you talk about exercises, any sort of exercises, demonstrate them online, show exactly how they're doing. And again, that will help make you more believable. And then the last point, this is probably the one people go to first, but I've got to push it down a bit, is social proof. And social proof is very simply what other people say about you. For example, let's say someone starts a copywriting account on X and they say, oh man, I'm an amazing copywriter, I've been doing this for years. Probably no one's going to believe them. But if I say, hey, I know this guy, he's been copywriting for years and he's amazing, that's a completely different thing. Now people are going to be interested in what he has to say because I've given him that social proof. And that's, I think, how you can get started with proof, even if you haven't got necessarily any or much proof. Does that help?
Absolutely. So it's really building things up with what you have right now, and I really like the fact that you tackled confidence. Right. I think that confidence might be one of those underrated, traits that not many people really talk about, right, in a mechanical way, but that actually more or less people can feel through your content. Obviously, video, audio is way, or gives you way more depth in terms of the confidence, but it also, I think, applies to writing too, right? So people can just feel someone who knows their stuff and someone who's just BSing.
It is, yeah. Confident writing tends to be clear and bold. It also tends to be definitive. Often, even if there's a lot of nuance to a subject, you want to cut most of that out, I think, for content. You want to be bold, offer simple solutions, and yes, this is the way you do this. Not, this might work for you. It's okay. It's worked for a few people I know. It's like, no, this is the way you do this. Bang, go and do it.
Yeah, it's about being polarizing, right? So even though you know that reality is not white or black, it's mostly within a spectrum of gray. In your content, you just have to be polarizing and just take a stand for what you're doing, why you're doing it, and yeah.
Yeah, because you can get more detailed then in the replies. When people comment, you can maybe offer a bit more subtlety, and you can occasionally write longer form content that does go into the details a bit more. But yes, most of your short stuff wants to be very bold, very polarizing, very definite.
Yep, I love that. Andrew, so knowing everything you know today, what would be your best tips to someone who's listening, who's an expert in his field, however, doesn't know how to get started?
Okay. Well, the first thing I would do then is I would just pick a platform that you want to focus on. And the platform you want to pick wants to be the one where most of your audience are. And you might not know that at first, but if you just spend some time watching the platform, you'll very quickly spot, is my audience here or are they not? And then when you've found where your audience are hanging out, and the next thing you want to do is look at all the other people who are like yourself, who are experts, who are posting content on them. And it can be a good idea to kind of get them into three levels: the small accounts, the medium accounts, and the large accounts. And then note down what type of content do they write. Is it all how-to content? Are they telling jokes? A lot are they posting memes? Are they, doing demonstrations? Whatever they're doing, write all that down. And then when you've done all that, you should have a good overview of the market. And then from there, you want to look for a gap you can put yourself in. See what can you do that no one else is doing. For example, when I started on X, there were no veteran copywriters offering value. No one. There were the bigger accounts, they were a bit jokey. They were posting memes, they were having fun. And I thought, well, that's not really me. I'm not really Mr. Personality, Mr. Social, but I am a nerd and I've got a lot of information I can share. So I went straight in with the value and that helped me grow. So yes, the first thing you want to do is look at the market and look for the gaps in the market where you can post. That makes sense?
Totally. So do you think that you should be different rather than just trying to mimic what others are doing? Because I noticed that a pattern, like when I'm, let's say, trying to break down a specific thing, let's say might it be a content strategy, let's say on X, or a content strategy on LinkedIn, I tend just to try to, or basically recognize patterns. And it's easy once you recognize those patterns to simply start applying them yourself.
Yes, obviously you want to look at what's working, but the danger of copying it too closely is you don't stand out. You know, you're not giving anybody a reason to follow you. For example, most of my posts, I call them quick copywriting tips, and I give I'll give exactly as it sounds, a quick tip. Now, if somebody else saw, hey, that's worked, and he starts doing something similar, maybe with a slightly different name, but the same format, now almost everyone's going to know what he's doing. He's ripping me off. And he's not going to stand out. You know, he might, if the content's good, he might develop a following, but he's always going to be in my shadow. So I would always look for what's working and then see if you can apply just a little twist to it, just something to make yourself stand out, be that little bit different.
Yeah, I like that. I think this goes back to something I heard, I think it was Rich Ruffin who said that it's easier to be, I don't know if he's the first who actually said this, but like this is how I remember it, is it was like, it's easier to be different than trying to be better. And I think like what you just shared is just a perfect illustration of what he said.
Yes. I mean, that's a quote I've heard. You know, it's better to be different than it is to be better. So, yeah. And then at some point, when you do make a name for yourself, you can start to focus on being better. Because for content creation, obviously being different's good. But when it's actual whatever you're selling, then it can be a good idea to be better as well. For example, I don't really do anything any other copywriter doesn't do. But I've been doing it for a long time. And I continually study. I continue to try to level up my skills to get as good as possible. So the only thing that does make me different is I'm better. So although you do want to go with better, I mean, you do want to go with different, always keep better in the back of your mind as something to focus on.
Yeah, how I like to think about it is basically being better, not than your competitors, simply be better when it, like comparing to yourself, right? So be better than yesterday. However, be different from the competitors.
Yeah, great way to put it. You always want to be leveling yourself up and trying to improve because the market's just getting tougher and tougher.
Yep, absolutely. Andrew, this might be kind of a personal question. Answer it if you feel like it, but I was a little bit not shocked. Shocked is not the right word, but I was a little bit, I asked myself, well, Andrew doesn't have a website, he doesn't have an email list. So what's going on?
That is a great question. When I started out, like I said, I started on the Warrior Forum. I started getting clients through messages on there. And then I got most of my work comes through referrals and repeat work with clients. So I've never really needed a website. I've kind of had a couple half built, and then I thought, I don't need this. Why? You know, it's not worth it. It's just a distraction for me. So I've never bothered. And an email list, I think probably a lot of experienced copywriters don't have email lists. I think people tend to think of copywriters and they just know the ones that have got email lists. But most haven't. Most are working copywriters. And to create a list and to send emails to it every day, it's almost a different business model. You know, it would require me to kind of restructure my day and do something different. And at the moment, at least, I'm doing well with copywriting. I don't need to do the list and go that route.
This is interesting, and this is exactly the same thing that I thought. I thought that, well, he might already have his client base, and he simply doesn't need to start an email list. So I'm glad you confirmed like what I had at the back of my head. But my question is, so why are you right now creating content on X? Is it just like for fun, or do you have perhaps another? Or are you following kind of a specific strategy right here?
Oh man, now you're making me feel guilty. The aim of me starting this account was to build a list and start selling my own coaching, consulting, and info products. and the like. That was the goal, and it's been a few years coming because the client work's been going so well. I mean, yeah, so that's all it is. I do intend to start an email list, but it keeps getting pushed further and further back.
Okay, like that makes perfect sense. So I see that you're having a lot of fun on Twitter, on X.
Yeah, I enjoy it because I think one of the dangers of freelancing is you by yourself all the time. You know, it's like my job essentially is me in front of a computer, and so having something like that I can go on and socialise a bit. It makes for quite a nice break. It lets me see what's going on in things at general. What's happening. So I do quite enjoy it. If I looked at it purely from kind of a return on investment thing, I would have quit on here a long time ago because, you spend an hour or so a day on here and I'm not making any money from it yet. But no, I do. I quite like it. I like helping people and giving back because I had people help me when I was starting out. So I think it's nice if I can maybe help people for free on there, because if you want good coaching, which is what I always recommend getting, it can be very expensive and a lot of people just can't afford it. So I think I'd like to try and help people by putting out quality content.
I think that this is a great mentality, and I think we're just going to end the podcast on this great quote. Thank you very much, Andrew, for taking the time, sitting down with me, and sharing what you've learned over the past 15 years. It was a pleasure to have you on the show. Obviously, what is the best place for the audience to connect with you? We already know the answer, but I just have to ask it.
That's been thank you for hosting me on air, Matt. It's been a great conversation with you. Again, X or Twitter is the best place to find me, and my username on there is Andrew Wright Copy.
Awesome. I'm obviously going to include the link to Andrew's X profile in the show notes. And thank you very much, Andrew. And I hope we'll catch up back soon.
Thank you. It's been great talking, and I hope we do too.
All right, so hope that you've enjoyed this episode. And as always, you're going to find all the links we mentioned in the show notes. And if you're a content creator or want to become one and want to monetize your knowledge online, then be also sure to check out my free emails, because in my daily emails, you're going to learn how you can speed up your content creation workflow to create more content faster and thus attract more clients online in less time. It's the first link in the description. Thank you very much for tuning in today, and I see you next week.